Thanks very much, and I appreciate everyone joining this morning. First couple of slides here, just you could go right through those to there's a disclosure, and then the next slide, please. There we go. So I'll start with the medicine. A cardiac ablation is an interventional procedure used to treat what's called a cardiac arrhythmia, where a person's heart's not beating properly. And with cardiac ablation, various catheters are guided into a patient's heart to diagnose the arrhythmia and selectively destroy or ablate the cardiac tissue in a way that restores normal heart rhythm. And these procedures, like most interventional procedures, are guided by X-ray imaging. And this is a picture of a conventional X-ray EP lab, where EP stands for electrophysiology. Note that as the doctor views the X-ray images on the screens, the heart can't be seen because the heart is invisible to X-rays. And because of this, back in the mid-90s, doctors could already see the limitations of X-ray guided ablations, and they dreamed of doing these procedures guided by MRI instead. With MRI, they'd be able to, for the first time, see the heart they were working on, so they'd be able to individualize the treatment strategies for every patient's unique anatomy, and they'd be able to, for the first time, verify that the ablation therapy they delivered was permanent rather than temporary, which is a big problem, and the main reason that, for instance, almost half of atrial fibrillation ablations, those patients require a second redo procedure. The only thing missing was a set of interventional tools like single-use consumable devices such as ablation catheters, diagnostic catheters, sheaths, and other devices that were safe for use in the MRI environment. And making these kinds of tools MRI compatible proved too difficult for everyone who tried until Imricor. Can we go to the next slide, please? Imricor has developed a patented platform technology that allows us to uniquely make interventional devices MRI compatible. And today, we've delivered to the medical market in Europe cardiac ablations guided by real-time MRI in labs we call ICMR EP labs, or Interventional Cardiac Magnetic Resonance EP labs. Next slide. And as we do that, we're transitioning cardiac ablation procedures from the X-ray EP lab to the ICMR EP lab. And importantly, we're not creating a new therapy. And this is not a new procedure. Next slide, please. We simply make the devices that are MR compatible that doctors need to perform the procedure with MRI imaging. In the next slide. It's just a new kind of lab with 21st century imaging capabilities intended to deliver faster, safer, more effective procedures with less expense. And so what we offer physicians, patients, and hospitals are the same kinds of tools and the same procedures that they already do, but with the advantages of MRI imaging. And also MRI is a radiation-free imaging modality. So there's no radiation for the patient, there's no radiation for the physician, no radiation for nurses or other medical personnel that are in the room. There's no lead gowns that need to be worn by any of the medical personnel, which create orthopedic problems for people who work in those environments day in, day out. And for the hospital, because this ICMR EP lab houses a normal diagnostic MRI machine, when procedures are not being performed, you can do standard diagnostic imaging of patients and generate additional revenue in that footprint in the hospital in a way that's impossible with a normal cardiac X-ray EP lab. For Imricor, what it means is that once we make this transition from X-ray to ICMR, every device that's used in the ICMR lab has to be MR compatible, and only Imricor makes MR compatible devices. So Imricor captures 100% of the consumable device revenue for every procedure that's done. We have no competition in the ICMR lab. Go to the next slide, please. It's well known, a very big market. It's about a $6 billion worldwide market for just the disposable ablation catheters. It's growing at a high rate, and it's still very much underserved. Next slide, please. And where we stand today, we have this platform technology with a really great path to significant scale. Today, we started with atrial flutter ablations, which is a relatively straightforward ablation procedure. We started in Europe, where there are approximately 1,000 sites, and they do about 70 procedures per site on average across the whole of the EU. Imricor generates about $3,500 per procedure, so every lab we sign up with has about $245,000 US per ICMR lab for each year. And now note that the early adopters, of course, that we have are often higher volume sites, so we can get up to as many as 200 atrial flutter ablations. And once these sites are doing these procedures, they are set up for the next step. And while we believe that ICMR atrial flutter ablations are the best way to do atrial flutter ablations, the reason I started this company back in 2006 was to do complex ablation procedures that are very difficult, where MR adds a significant amount of advantage over conventional X-ray imaging. And our first indication in that space is the ventricular tachycardia ablations. It'll be a key driver for adoption because people will see that we're moving to cover all of the types of arrhythmia ablations that are possible. And we expect that will then increase the number of sites that sign up. Every site, we will about double our revenue in the EU because it comes with a higher ASP for the devices that are used for VT and higher reimbursement for VT. Beyond that, we'll be doing two things, not necessarily in order, but we'll be expanding our geographies. For instance, gaining FDA approval in the US, where there's over 1,100 sites, a higher reimbursement compared to the EU. And really, we expect to generate about 2 times the revenue in the United States that we do in the European Union for the same number of sites. And the path toward getting FDA approval is for us first to get what's called an investigational device exemption, or an IDE. That's the approval to do a clinical trial that's required to get approval for your devices. And that IDE we expect will finish by the end of the year, and we'll have that approval. And then we can move on to a clinical trial, or we can pause and wait a bit depending on how finances look at that time. And we can do a trial either immediately or sometime in the future. Same time, we'll move towards addressing the entire market, and that will be to fulfill all of the indications that we could address with atrial fibrillation ablations. It's the same consumable product set that's used for VT. It is the largest volume of procedures, and that will then provide us access to the full market potential of the $6 billion worldwide market. So my last slide here is just sort of a status of where we are now and what our high-level plans are for the coming years. We launched our products just before the pandemic, and we had this idea that we would sign new sites up, we would get those sites doing procedures, and we would develop over the first couple of years all of the devices that are required to move to ventricular tachycardia ablations beyond atrial flutter. Well, we didn't do many cases during the pandemic, but we did sign up 15 sites. Our cases were those types of cases or procedures that were banned during the pandemic. But now, this spring, we've relaunched our products post-pandemic. We're bringing our current sites online and performing procedures. That's what we did in the second quarter. In the third quarter, now we'll apply for our VT trial. We'll continue bringing our sites online, and we'll begin adding new sites to our roster as well. In the fourth quarter, that's when we'll start the VT trial. We'll continue adding sites. Next year, we'll complete that VT trial, add more sites, and we'll consider that FDA trial depending on how finances look at the time. And then as we move into 2024 and 2025 and beyond, we'll launch our VT products, we'll keep adding more sites, and we'll continue to grow those geographies and progress our atrial fibrillation program. So that's a quick overview, really just about what we do and why we do it. We have a lot of materials online on our website, on the ASX announcement websites, where we have more presentations that are fleshed out with more detail. But with that, I'll just stop and open it up to questions.
Thanks, Steve. Quite a few questions actually coming through. Can just briefly, I know everyone talks about COVID, but you're kind of in the firestorm here. How did COVID affect the business?
It was tough. We launched just a month before the world shut down, and as elective procedures were banned, these are those types of elective procedures. So it really hurt our revenue. What we did though is we, hearing from our investors, listening to them that look, Imricor is a 2023, 2024 story, not so much a 2020, 2021 story. And so we kept leaning into it. We did everything that we said we would do in those 2 years, besides the sales that were prohibited, but we stayed on track for ventricular tachycardia. We stayed on track for our FDA approval. And so we are launching or relaunching this product now with a much closer window between when a site gets started doing atrial flutter ablations and when they'll be able to do ventricular tachycardia ablations. So we're just getting restarted again. We saw the COVID impact sort of lift in April, and we expect and are seeing increased sales each quarter as we move forward. It's a good time now.
And why the focus on Europe to start with?
So when I started the company, I was a US appointed expert in the field of MR compatibility. And the FDA asked me, after I just started the company, if we would engage with them to do a cooperative research and development agreement where we would work together with them on a research basis to help learn what's the math, modeling, and testing that's required to prove that anything is MR compatible. And I thought that was a good idea, but I didn't want to be regulated industry at the same time we're trying to be a collaborative research partner with the agency. So we brought our clinical and development work and our clinical release work to Europe first. But now we're on our way back to the United States, and it's the path is actually quite clear for us.
And can you talk us through that kind of sales and distribution process and kind of how long that takes?
Yeah, it's very variable, but we partner with the MR vendors that sell the scanner that goes inside of that lab. So we have a great partnership with Siemens, and we have a great partnership with Philips. And I expect that we're going to grow a great partnership with GE, which really covers then all of the three major manufacturers of MRI equipment. And then we work together with their sales teams that are already in the field, the same teams that place conventional X-ray EP lab equipment. They can place ICMR EP lab equipment. So it's very collaborative. Some sites move very quickly from a construction phase to having a new lab. Others will start to replace X-ray equipment with MR equipment as we move forward. And in many cases, to get started very quickly, we can utilize an existing MR scanner in a hospital to do cases. We just bring our equipment in and make an EP lab out of that diagnostic imaging suite that exists.
And have you done any sort of cost analysis on your process? Is this about a better process, or is this about a cheaper product, for example?
For even the simple ablation procedures like atrial flutter, we've designed our equipment to be to cost similar to what existing ablation catheters and other devices cost. We wanted the per procedure cost to be very much the same as it is in conventional labs. The value proposition is that if we can do the procedure right in one procedure by using the MR data, the MR images to make sure that we've got a durable solution in one procedure rather than two or three, then the overall price per patient goes way down. Yeah, so it's
there's some scale to it.
I lost my train of thought. Sorry, go ahead.
It is later at night there, but where do you fit in terms of Australia with kind of TGA approval and kind of distribution?
Yeah, we have two pieces of our sales. It's a capital equipment piece, an EP recording system, and the catheters that you plug into the EP recording system. Our EP recording system has TGA approval, and the catheter is under review right now. So we expect actually quite soon to be able to launch in Australia. In New Zealand, we have approval already for both devices, and we'll begin that work very soon as well.
And there's a question here, which states you kind of, as mentioned in one of your previous announcement, are your consumables kind of compatible with conventional X-ray machines?
They are. They're not quite as useful in conventional X-ray machines, but especially though our miscellaneous equipment like sheaths and transeptal needles, not so much the ablation catheter that really is very specialized because we use the MRI system itself to track it, and there's technology that allows that to happen only in the ICMR lab. But other devices, we make sure that they're conspicuous in X-ray and that they can be used to deliver other devices in that X-ray EP lab.
And so the FDA approval is obviously something looking forward for the company. Can you talk us through that process and kind of timing?
You bet. So you start with this IDE that I mentioned. And once we have an IDE approved, then we have shared with the FDA all of our safety data and a clinical trial design. Then we execute that clinical trial. It gets reviewed, and FDA approval hopefully follows shortly thereafter. But it can be a couple of years of a process. That's why when we get our IDE approved, and which we believe we'll have by the end of this year, we're going to take an assessment of whether it makes sense for us to drive forward with FDA approval right now, knowing that we wouldn't get approval for a couple of years anyway, or let European revenue ramp up so that we can self-fund that trial.
So that's all we have time for. There's a couple more questions there. If you don't mind, you can answer those live and type in your answers if you've got time. It'd be appreciated.
You bet. Thank you very much.